Hey everybody, it's Nikki, and I was going to take this opportunity with an almost empty house, although there's people, some are happy playing video games and some are sleeping, but all the adults are gone and they make me nervous. So I was going to take this opportunity to try to make a quick video, which is kind of a hybrid. It's part about calibration factor use in the morning because I want to start showing you guys how I'm using it in the morning, and also part evidence of that auto mode blood morning mechanical rise, or whatever I called it, because I think I can do both in this video, if I can beat the door, which is the thing, and we know I like to talk. So that's a tall order. Okay, so this is what I want to say, and I actually did, because you know it, do this. I do that. I don't care. Call me crazy. Call me whatever you want. But I'm wearing this pump to help with my diabetes, and not all days do I feel like it is. So I do try to track the numbers so that I can take back some of the control and see what I can do with it. That being said, this is what I want to say. This morning, I woke up at 4:20 a.m. to get out of auto mode. My blood sugar was a 125. And my calibration factor was a 6.41. Now, this was day 6 of my sensor. So I would like to say day 6 of sensors, tracking my calibration factor, I definitely see a huge inflation of calibration factors. So now I'm starting to understand that day 6 is maybe a wash. I don't know if you can extend it. I don't know if resetting it does anything. But I know in my case, there is a big inflation there. And I don't know what that does to auto mode because I'm not doing it. But anyway. So I had a big calibration factor of 6.41. I'm guessing that was at least a 5.8 in reality. Any way you cut it, a 125 is a great number. That was my blood glucose, but a 6.41 is a high calibration factor. And I tried to explain in another video that just means a packed 125. So anyway, either way, I got out of auto mode, went back to sleep. At 6:16, I got up, and my blood sugar was a 138. So it had gone up a little bit. But my calibration factor was a 6.86, which again is really big, and I know that's inflated, but let's say even a 6.4 or something like that. So at a 138 and 6.4, this is how I'm using my calibration factor in the morning. I know that is not a good time to be starting my coffee. Not all mornings am I willing to wait, and knowing how to use my calibration factor doesn't make the choice any easier, but I have a lot of information I can use, and I can go with it or not. This morning, I'm willing to wait for my coffee because I would like a flat line when I drink it. So at 6:16, I had a 138 calibration factor of 6.86. I did my insulin, and I decided to wait. I wanted to get the insulin on board and give it a head start. This is what's interesting, is that at 6:20, I did test back-to-back this morning because I was trying to figure out what was going on. At 6:20, I had a 133. 15 minutes later, or 20 minutes later, I had a 130. Those are my blood glucose. My calibration factors were staying higher. So even having that insulin on board, it had not begun to push my calibration factor in the other direction, which I now understand has something to do with the interstitial fluid. And as long as your blood sugar is pushing into the interstitial fluid, you'll see an increase in your calibration factor. And once it starts to pull from it is where you see this drop. But these numbers are actually going up, which means my blood sugar is going to continue to rise, which is interesting because I was asleep and not eating anything, which I'll show you my auto mode activity over the night in just 1 minute. Anyway, 130, I finally at about 6:50, I said a 130 and 6.3. I decided to get up, get my morning going, start making lunches, go start the laundry. It's not, I don't need exercise, but at a 6.3, I know that I'd like to pull that back a little bit closer to my 5.5. so that my 130 doesn't take off with the caffeine. I didn't test again until 9:19. Now I did track using my SG, and I have learned how to estimate my calibration factor with my SG in order to look for big movement and kind of like a red flag that might cause me to need to test. And this morning everything looked good. And when I did test at 9:19 a.m., my blood sugar was a 128 and my SG was a 127. And that's where I see, as long as I am keeping stable, which is a lot of work, but as long as I'm keeping stable, those two numbers are really accurate. It's the movement, it's the blood sugar swings that cause the big gap in those numbers. Okay, anyway, so why at a 133 and a 125 and a 130 was I not drinking my coffee this morning? Because if I didn't have my calibration factor, I would have been. In fact, I would have thought that was a great blood sugar and I would have downed my 2 cups. But using my calibration factor, I knew it wasn't a great number, and I knew that my blood sugar was pushing over into my interstitial fluid, which was setting me up for a big rise in that blood sugar. So I waited, and I ended up waiting about 45 minutes before I had my first cup. Now, this is what I went back and saw in microboluses. I will save you all the little tiny numbers because there's tons of them, and I will sum it up for you as quickly as possible. Between 1:54 a.m. and 2:49, so I'm talking about 1 hour, I received 40% of my typical basal rate at that hour. Between 2:54 a.m. and 3:50, so again, that next hour, it was 47%. And then the next 35 minutes, because that's when I exited, was 31%. So those were temp basals, the equivalent of 40%, 47%, and 31%. Again, I can't argue whether or not what of that I needed to prevent hypoglycemia. I don't want to argue that. I love being able to go to sleep in auto and not wake up to sugar crashes. But that is what contributes to those high calibration factors in the morning. And this morning, even having gotten out of auto, those for me are really significant temp basals. As I said, I exercise sometimes at a 50%. So a 40% and 47% and 31% for over 2.5 hours of my morning leading up to when I got out. That's a big reduction in insulin. So this morning, the good news is I do get out of auto mode. I do let things begin to stabilize, and then I do watch my calibration factor and I use it. And I know I'm talking push into my interstitial fluid, and I know that some people are like, okay, she's a nut job. And I don't blame you, except I'm watching this every day, and I would love to show you my morning. I shared it on my Facebook group. I'd love to show you my morning, and it was a very nice and stable line versus yesterday morning when I stayed in auto mode, and it was a climb for 3 hours without having the coffee and with having the insulin on board. So I don't know what that is. If that's an argument about what happens in the morning with blood sugars in auto mode, or if that's a lesson in calibration factor. I like doing this, and I'm eager to share because I think there's a lot of potential in it. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and may the force be with you.